Who are my skeptics? Who are the people that are worried about this technology? All right. I am one of you. So my name is Norman Bier, as you heard. I am part of a number of projects at Carnegie Mellon that sort of sit at the place where learning science and educational technology intersect. Some of that work is through a project called the Simon Initiative. Some of it is through a project called the Open Learning Initiative. I'm going to be talking about both of those today. And in addition to all of those things, I am a CS educator. My dirty secret is that after 25 years of teaching computer science, I still love teaching the intro courses. Everyone else wants to teach the high-level stuff. I want to teach the students. Why am I a skeptic? Well, the reason for my skepticism is that I've lived through an ed tech hype cycle or two in my day. And I'm wondering how many of you have also lived through an ed tech hype cycle. So how many of you are old enough to remember when MIT OpenCourseWare was going to provide an MIT degree to every child in Africa? That was great. That didn't happen. How about the year of the MOOC? We were going to get down to only 10 colleges and universities. How many of you remember this? How about adaptive courseware? That was the stuff, right? We were going to push out adaptive courseware independent of instruction. Every student was going to have a perfect opportunity. Or if it wasn't going to be adaptive courseware, maybe it was going to be one magic robot tutor in the sky, saving everyone, teaching them mathematics. Poor Jose will never live down that quote, and I will be beating up on him for it for the rest of my career. How about VR, AR? If it wasn't going to be magic robot tutors, it was going to be VR, AR, right? Non-transformational. Who remembers blockchain for education? Yeah, that was the stuff. And then we've heard that AI, generative AI, despite well-acknowledged problems, is going to transform and change learning. And I would suggest that AI is not coming to save us. And in fact, the notion that I'm standing here talking to you about ed tech hype cycles might be the problem, that our approach to all of this work ends up being a bit problematic, a bit over-enthusiastic, not intentional. And so when you think about the talk that I'm about to give, if you think about it at all, maybe think about it through that lens. Are there opportunities for generative AI? Absolutely. How should we think about it? How can we think about an approach that takes advantage of this opportunity, this promise, and this enthusiasm, but allows us to do something about it so that, 2 years from now, I don't have a generative AI slide on this deck. Fair? So what is that lens? What am I going to be talking about? Well, it's mostly going to be about Carnegie Mellon University's approach to learning science and educational technology. And I'm going to talk about that first through the lens of the Simon Initiative, and then the Open Learning Initiative. I want to do a walk through some of our current projects, both because I'm really excited about them and because they offer opportunities to collaborate. And then I want to look specifically at a project that we're working with here in India, a very strong collaborative partnership with Namtech. You'll be hearing more about that project as well. All right? See if I can keep it. So there's the promise. That's what you're going to get out of the talk. Let's see if I can deliver on it before jet lag gets me. So let's start off talking about the Simon Initiative and OLI. One of the things that is interesting at Carnegie Mellon is that we do not have a college of education. Carnegie Mellon got to its current level of prominence under President Dick Sayert, who decreed that for CMU to become a prominent university, we had to give up on certain things. So we're never going to have a law school, we're never going to have a med school, we're never going to have a college of education. That bet has played out for Carnegie Mellon fairly well, and we really have picked a few things: engineering, computer science, AI, and drama, believe it or not, in which we excel. But interestingly, in that space, we've also started to see just over 50 years of work at the place where EdTech and learning science intersect. And so over a half a century, we've started to see a tremendous amount of work and strength in this space that has ended up providing a lot of potential for demonstrably improving learning outcomes, but at the same time has not reached scale. So our current university administration has taken on the task of asking, how can we take the breadth of this work and weave it together? How can we take this work and get it out into the world? How can we see it have impact? And so they've launched an effort called the Simon Initiative, which is intended to do that. So that's part of my work. Simon Initiative is named for Herb Simon. How many of you know who Herb Simon is? Who's Herb Simon? Who is he? He was not the Mindstorms guy. So Herb Simon is one of the very early Carnegie Mellon professors, who's probably best known as a CMU professor for initially his work in industrial behavior, understanding how human beings engage and act as in organizations. This is work that got him a Nobel Prize. He went on to try to recognize that given that he's trying to understand organizations, he needs to understand people, and if he wants to understand people, he needs to understand how people think, which leads him into work in artificial intelligence, work that contributes to his winning the Turing Award, so computer science version of a Nobel. This, in turn, leads him away from the machines and begins to start looking at some of the things happening inside we squishy humans, essentially inventing the field of cognitive science. And across all of that work, spending a lot of time thinking about how do we go about improving teaching and learning. Best part of my job is getting to talk about Herb Simon. So there's only one building on campus back at CMU that is named for someone who is a professor rather than a president or a donor. That is Newell Simon Hall. So Herb Simon held in a lot of regard. And his concern as he spends his career thinking about how we can improve teaching and learning is that he looks around at the leading theorists of his day. He's looking at Skinner, he's looking at Dewey, and he's saying these people are not scientific enough. That if we want to make meaningful progress in understanding and improving learning and in understanding and improving education, we need to start to treat this work as a serious scientific endeavor. And that means that we need to move away from this notion that education is going to be one person standing here on a stage preaching at you, like I'm doing, and instead we need to move this into the realm of a community-based research activity, where the research is improving teaching and learning, and we treat that research with the same enthusiasm and the same rigor as the work in our own domains. So Carnegie Mellon does not have a college of education. Simon's challenge that you read behind me is how can we turn the entire university system into a college of education? How can we turn every classroom into a learning laboratory? And that, at heart, is the work of the Simon Initiative. That said, we've got a remarkably diverse set of work, and so we need to think a little bit about what is it that makes it the Simon approach? What is it that's special? And it gets into that notion of how do we treat this as a real science? The challenge here is that to study something, we need to observe it. And where does learning happen? As a change in knowledge state, something that's happening, we think, in the brain. It's not somewhere that we can directly observe it. And so we're stuck building models of what we think is happening, that change of knowledge state. And if we want to study it rigorously, we need to take those models and then connect it to observable practice. So we can take those close observations, use it to refine and improve our model. Simon talks about this approach as a learning engineering approach, where we're using these models of expertise and these models of learning to connect what we know from the emerging learning sciences with new kinds of innovations. So we use the science to inform our models, and in turn, the models to inform our new activities. Key to this is that we need these innovations to be instrumented. That instrumentation first flows back into our model of expertise. So this is great. We've already got a cycle where we're improving things. It can also keep pushing back into our practice. And though we often think about these kinds of innovations as being technology-based, obviously they don't need to be, right? A new kind of classroom approach, so long as you're able to instrument it, tie it back to a model, is one that we can also study. So this is fantastic for smaller projects. It's fantastic for improving our innovations. But what's interesting is that in the aggregate, we're able to take these data, push them back to our colleagues in the learning sciences, and drive fresh insights into how human beings learn. So when it's working at its best, learning engineering ends up offering us a virtuous cycle that gives us a chance to make real progress on some of the hardest challenges in both understanding human learning, but also in delivering those kinds of learning experiences. When I say a model, what do I mean? Well, in many cases, we can start to work with really advanced models. Some of my colleagues do, building out skills graphs and hidden Markov models and advanced statistical understandings of learning. But at a basic level, we can also work with simple models. This notion that we're able to connect the skills that we're trying to teach with the activities that we believe are going to try to produce those skills, and finally, a set of assessments that helps us understand what's going on with the student's knowledge state. Simply building this kind of model of expertise and tying it to the learning experiences we're developing ends up really being helpful, not just for research, but also for immediately drilling in and understanding where are their challenges in the course that you're designing, right? We have some problems right here. If I were to go live with this course, I've got some skills that I'm not teaching, but I'm testing on. I've got some other skills that I'm not actually assessing. And when you start to drill in and do this kind of analysis, you also find that sometimes you miss some skills. And so building a robust model ends up giving you a condition in which the kind of research that I'm describing, the kind of improvement that I'm describing is possible. Ooh. I don't know what's happening right now. I can start talking really quickly, or we can stop the slideshow. That was wild. How many of you teach with technology? How many of you have been in this? I think it might have actually been the transitions. I think I accidentally embedded a transition that was, but let's find out. Almost certainly, but it recovers better than I do. Yeah, it's not the, one more second. All right. Great. Sorry about that. Somehow every slide was on a 1-second timer, so challenging me. So when we're thinking about learning engineering, if you're interested in learning a little more, I want to call out 2 references to you that we're pretty proud of. Jeff Young, as part of EdSurge's Moonshot catalog a few years back, did a great article on learning engineering. Talks about it from a couple perspectives, worth looking up, and it's a short read. But I also love to recommend Justin Reich, who asked this question in a slightly more dignified way than I do. Why do we see all of this hype around EdTech that has very few results? And I think he does a really nice exploration of what we need to be doing beyond just the technology to transform education. Great read, and you'll hear a little more about the kind of work and the kind of approach that we do that I'm talking about today. So I've referenced a few times the Open Learning Initiative. What am I talking about? At a very basic level, OLI is an exemplar of the learning engineering approach that I've just described. It's a project at Carnegie Mellon that sits underneath the Simon Initiative with the goal of building online learning environments, that is courseware, and having that courseware serve to both enact learning but also drive research. OLI takes its history from roughly the same time that MIT's OpenCourseware comes on the scene, but we end up with very different agendas. So MIT's OpenCourseware, we've got the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, 2 program officers offering MIT a fairly large pile of money and asking, what if you put your stuff online, right? It's 2001, the web's going to change everything. What if you put some notes, put some videos, whatever your faculty want to give you, and put it online? And MIT says, that sounds great. We will definitely take that large gift, and we will ask our faculty what they want to put online. Lots of press around this, some of which you've already seen on my screen. New York Times loves it. And with that press, the Hewlett program officers, Kathy Casserly, Mike Smith, come down to Pittsburgh, visit us at CMU, and they say, hey, do you guys see this great stuff, the great press that MIT is getting? Yeah, we see the great stuff MIT press is getting. A little bit of a rivalry, CMU and MIT. So, well, would you like to do the same thing? And the answer is, not really, no, we don't want to do the same thing. That probably would have ended the conversation, but they happened to be visiting us on September 10th, 2001. They were supposed to fly home the next day, and by the time they got to the airport, there were no planes flying anywhere in the US. And so they were stuck spending a few days with us asking, okay, if that version of using the web for learning isn't interesting to you, what would be? And our answer is, say, look, we understand that this access agenda, this ability to provide greater access to education, is important. It's part of our mission statement. We understand why you're heading that road. But we think that access without effectiveness is just not going to be useful. And so what we wanted to propose was a project that took on some of Carnegie Mellon's traditional strengths in psychology, in cognitive science, but also in computer science and how human beings use technology to ask, can we use what was then this newfangled World Wide Web thing to build learning environments that demonstrably enacted learning for students? And can we use those same environments to experiment and fine-tune that learning experience? So the answer at this point, because I've been giving this talk for about 14 years in various versions, is of course we can do that. Of course we can use the web to enact learning. But it was a fresh question in 2001. And we learned something new in addition to, of course we can enact learning. We found out that though we were building these courseware to support independent learners, that student out in the world somewhere who just daily wants to learn statistics, we were seeing faculty pick up these courseware and use them in place of much more expensive textbooks, and the faculty began leveraging the data that were coming off of the courses to change their instructional habits. And that seemed to be a really big difference in a way that we could have a lever to make some impact. And so OLI takes as its mission continuing to build these types of learning environments in a way that brings in a larger community of educators and researchers to build Herb Simon's community-based research activity. We want to deliver better learning for students. We want to understand how to make this a more impactful tool for faculty. And we want to continue to drive this back into the learning science community because learning science is fairly new and we've got a lot to learn. So OLI is frequently thought of as just our courses or just our technology, but in fact, what we're talking about is a whole approach to carefully designing, developing, delivering, and improving learning experiences. The technology is a piece of that, but it's not all of it. We really emphasize a team-based approach that is a little obsessive about data. So key features then, when we're thinking about an OLI course, we're thinking about a ready-to-adopt learning experience that is carefully sequenced with lots of active learning opportunities that emphasize key feedback and targeted hints that apply as best we can principles from the learning science, both in the content and in the platform, and that provide opportunities for integrating and changing new kinds of activities to drive new kinds of research. So we talk about this a lot as learning design as hypothesis. It's a phrase that I stole from my colleague Dale Pike, Virginia Tech. The notion being that every learning experience that we design is a hypothesis that this set of activities will lead to a change in learning state for our students. What makes it a hypothesis, though, in part, is if we design this experience in a way that it's observable, that the hypothesis is disprovable, right? And so in some ways, this feels a little uncomfortable. Am I suggesting that we should be doing research on our learners? Anybody uncomfortable with that idea? No? All right. A couple people, a little bit of discomfort. That's okay. Usually I get more hands than that. So I want to remind you that every time you walk into a classroom and begin teaching, you are executing an experiment. You are leveraging a bunch of activities that you believe will change knowledge state, but you're not actually running a very robust experiment. You're not actually closing the loop to see if your hypothesis is a good one. We talk an awful lot about team-based design. In many learning environment development, when we're building online courses, you often see a faculty member at the center of this diagram. We want to honor that faculty expertise, but also recognize that it takes a team with expertise in technology and project management and learning science and building these kinds of things to build effective environments that work for the greatest number of students. We emphasize embedding principles from the learning science, and if I have to pick one, it's this notion that goal-directed practice and targeted feedback are absolutely critical to learning. And so we work very hard to embed practice activities with this feedback directly in the problem-solving context. So students aren't submitting a paper and getting feedback 2 weeks later. They're getting feedback the second that they have a misconception or the second that they break a misconception. Obviously, if we want to run experiments, we need to provide space for the different kinds of tools and experiences that new domains require. This is an example of one of these. We have a chemistry lab, a V-Lab, that was intended as a way for our faculty, Dave Bier, great chemistry professor at CMU, to try to dig in on what he felt were his students' tendency to never think like chemists, that they end up employing shallow ends-means analysis, hit a problem, get to the back of the book and look for a formula and plug in the numbers. If it doesn't work, then they plug in numbers into a different formula. And that wasn't what he was trying to teach them. And so he builds out a new kind of learning approach, tying these virtual chem labs into a more synthetic challenge. So it's a case study of arsenic poisoning in the water of Bangladesh, real world example, one that the UN had been working on when he developed this. So from the students' perspective, they're working with a local chemist who's been developing mechanisms for filtering water using local materials. They need to better understand what is the level of arsenic in the water, what is the local soil and its ability to extract that arsenic or other kinds of pollutants. Great addition to the course, but also a great addition to the literature body. We talk frequently, almost obsessively, about learning data because one of the most powerful features of technology-based instruction is this ability to embed assessment into every learning opportunity. And we can use these data that are derived from learner interactions first to give feedback to students, right? Even if that's at the level of simply giving targeted hints and feedback based on misconceptions. But as I mentioned, we also want to use these data to give feedback to instructors. So this is one example of the kinds of feedback that we're trying to understand. What you're looking at is a tool called the Learning Dashboard. This is from the OLI Statistics course, work of Marcia Lovett, professor at CMU. Our idea is that every activity in our course is tied back to learning objectives and sub-skills. As students engage with these activities, we've got a hidden Markov model making predictions about the students' change into a higher knowledge state. As a professor, I assign this, have the students do it before class. I can then come in, take a quick look at my learning dashboard to see what are the skills the students seem to be doing okay at. Those are the ones in green. Where are the areas that they seem to be struggling, areas in yellow and red, and then drill down to see what are the specific skills, what are the questions they're getting wrong. And armed with this, I can walk into the class, create some new on-the-fly activities that should lead to better learning. How does that sound? It should sound like nonsense. How many of you waltz into the classroom and just create brand new activities on the fly? That's hard, right? So while the underlying notion here that we're able to bring data to the forefront and make it actionable for our educators is sound, what we're finding is that taking action from these data, particularly in rapid turnaround cycles, is really hard. And so this is an active area for research for us. How do we understand how to take this work and integrate it back into your instructional practice? But beyond the work that we see in providing feedback to faculty and providing feedback to students, we also want to use these same data to emphasize iterative and continuous course improvement, feedback loops to our designers, and information back into the science of learning. We have a lot of different approaches to design analytics, some of which are focusing on trying to build out the most powerful course you can on the front end, but others are then focused on understanding how well did this course live up to the design expectations that I had when I started. How many of you have seen a learning curve? All right, more hands than I thought. So this is work of my colleagues at Data Shop, led by John Stamper, who you'll be hearing from on Sunday. The basic notion with our learning curve is that for any given skill, any given knowledge component, I can aggregate out all of the student attempts at that skill and understand in that learning environment how much help they needed at each new opportunity. So what you're seeing in this case, first opportunity, students needed a lot of hints. They got a lot of questions incorrect, roughly 50 to 55% of the time. But with each subsequent attempt, we see that the students start to need less and less help until they're able to get to the end and execute on this skill without help fairly regularly. So what this does is this validates the model of learning that I've built. It says that this course, which happens to be in engineering statics, is doing a good job, right? This is a perfect learning curve. It's a thing of beauty. We don't usually see these. Usually we see learning curves that look like this. But that's okay, right? If we're committed to continuous improvement, we're recognizing off the bat, we're not gonna get it right the first time, almost ever. And so sometimes we're gonna be teaching students things that they already know. Sometimes, bottom left and upper right, you're going to be seeing that what you thought were discrete skills are actually things that need to be teased apart, be given additional targeted practice. And occasionally you end up with a learning curve like the one on the bottom right, which I still do not have an explanation for. Sometimes your best ideas just can't be explained and need to be dumped. So this is important because it gives us this opportunity to break illusions, right? We've got these illusions of knowing, these illusions of teaching, and of thinking that we know what's happening in our class. The data give us this ability to go in, break those illusions, and really emphasize reality. And this is really important because it turns out that this design space, as we're building these kinds of learning environments, is incredibly complicated and incredibly messy. Borrowing some research from some colleagues here, sort of noted that each time you're building an intervention, you have a series of decisions that you need to make. And as you start to walk that decision tree, well, should I start with more help or should I start with a more challenging understanding? You end up making decisions and then being presented with new ones. Do I want this to be a focused practice or a distributed practice attempt? And as we continue to work our way down this tree, it turns out that our options, the decisions that we make, are enormous. How many different options do you think that we have as we start to dig into this and understand what are the kinds of decisions? More than 100? More than 1,000? More than 1 million? You guys are full of lunch. I'm not getting any participation. So more than 205 trillion options. And since this paper was published, we continue to identify new ways that we might think about these kinds of designs. Fantastic article in Science, Instructional Complexity and the Science to Constrain It from 2013. Highly recommend. It's a great read. It continues to be as relevant as it was when it was published. So this gives us a challenge, right? In the face of this kinds of instructional complexity, it turns out that learning isn't rocket science. It's actually harder. We have far more variables to account for than it takes to get a rocket off the planet. So what hope do we have in addressing this kind of instructional complexity? How do we make progress? I would argue that what it takes is data, rich learning data from an enormous variety of institutions and students and faculty, contributed in ways that allow a much larger community who see this work, who see this research as part of their job, to address it. And in fact, what's wrong with this diagram? US-centric, thank you. You should have like the, the American standing on stage with the map of America behind him. It was a give me. Obviously, we need to start to account for the much broader context of human experience, which is enormous, right? And so we have this tremendous opportunity to bring together a much broader community, collecting these kinds of learning data, jointly analyzing, sharing the results of those analyses, and building a shared tool set that really allow us to start to think about and make progress on that kind of complexity. And it turns out that it's an approach that works. One of the studies that first put OLI on the map was our OLI Accelerated Statistics study. We were looking at a set of students at CMU taking our Intro to Stats class. Almost everyone does. And we ended up running some of those students through the OLI course version with limited office hours and support. Other students attended the traditional class with a set of meetings and a textbook. When we did a comparison with those students, the students in the OLI condition ended up learning roughly 6 times that of their peers in the traditional condition, and much more than those that were taking the National Chaos Test, which was our assessment instrument. Now, if you're looking at this and suggesting that that change from 55 to 70% of knowledge is probably not a great move, you're right, we need to do better than that. But what we found were these students were learning faster and they were doing it in half the time. Half the classroom meetings, the same amount of study time outside of the class, and when they went to be retested a semester later, they were retaining the information as well as their peers. We didn't actually believe this result, ended up going out and replicating the study. It continues to replicate. We've seen it running in other different kinds of institutions, and it forms what becomes the foundation of a much broader research base for the kind of work and studies that we do at OLI. That virtual chemistry lab that I showed you Turns out that interactions with that lab end up out-predicting every other variable, including race, including gender, including mathematics preparation, to predict student success. That's amazing, right? If we're able to start to take prior preparation and gender out of the STEM equation, we've done something amazing. More recently, learning is not a spectator sport. Trying to understand the impact of different styles of learning activities. We were lucky to be able to combine some OLI materials with a MOOC, and then to get some clean understanding of what are students learning from watching videos, what are they learning from reading, and what are they learning from active learning. Remarkable that when the students begin to engage with the active learning opportunities, we see more than 6 times the learning taking place. Plenty of information on the website if you're interested in digging in more. I'm also happy to sit and brag about this work all day, so I'm going to force myself to keep going. So over the past decade, we've been in business now for about 2 decades, but over the past 10 years, we've seen a tremendous population of students engaging in independent enrollments. We continue to serve that audience, but a growing set of faculty who are taking advantage of these courses in an academic context, which is what's really driving our research. We have emphasized in this space, especially for the past 5 years, finding ways to invite and bring a larger community into the work, because it turns out that that team-based diagram that I drew creates a bottleneck for who's able to go in, author, modify, and experiment. And so we've been investing heavily in new kinds of authoring tools and easier to use analytic tools that'll let anyone go in and begin to build an OLI course. If you're interested in the catalog, jump onto OLI. Obviously, the courses are available for use, but we're really interested in folks who want to build their own courses, who might want to take a version of our course and start to make it their own, test some new hypotheses, and maybe come back with some information that says they've got some new approaches that should get pushed back into the canon course. So that's what we've been working on to this point. I wanted to take the last bit of time and talk a little more about what are some of the things that we're working on. And the first is the Taurus platform. As I mentioned, we have been running online courseware since 2001. We were in desperate need of a platform upgrade, and strategically we knew that keeping the authoring of courses down to a very small population of highly trained learning engineers was creating a real bottleneck. We also knew that the original platform that we built as a closed source proprietary platform ends up creating a barrier for a lot of faculty and a lot of concern, right? What if I come to depend upon this courseware and suddenly CMU stops providing funding or the platform stops working? And so we've launched the Taurus platform back in 2020 as an attempt to build a larger open source platform that addresses both the authoring and the delivery in ways that really help you with instrumentation and that are built on an open source license, really with the goal of creating a foundation for that broader open source community that we've talked about. The Taurus project is now in its 4th year, and we gained a lot of momentum early from a partnership with the Education Through Exploration Center. ATX is an organization at Arizona State University who has become an anchor partner in this work of building the Taurus environment. They create highly immersive learning environments, originally using the Smart Sparrow authoring platform. And in 2020, just about the time we were launching the Taurus effort, that scenario that I described came true for ETX. They have a bunch of courseware, they have a bunch of grant deliverables, and suddenly Smart Sparrow is acquired by Pearson, who announces that they're going to shelve the product. And at this point, ETX is looking around trying to figure out how they meet their deliverables. Do they build their own thing? Do they go to another commercial provider? They've ended up jumping in full force and become an anchor part of this community, and it has changed what we've been able to accomplish, both in terms of the speed that we can develop, but also in terms of capability. So we've been able to recapitulate the Smart Sparrow authoring and delivery interface. If you're interested in learning more about the platform and you're interested in learning more about the collaboration, I highly recommend that you take a look at the eLiterate blog. It's the work of Michael Feldstein, who has been blogging EdTech for at least 25 years. And he spent a lot of time working closely with us and writing about what was working and where this collaboration might be headed. His insights are really worth digging into, not just about the Taurus platform, but about the need for platforms that capture and express pedagogical intent faithfully in ways that also collect data. Another large project that I wanted to call out, we have a large methods training institute happening at CMU that extends well beyond the OLI work and really starts to pull in a vast collection of advanced data science, educational data mining approaches. I put this on the slide in part because, as John noted, when we were hearing about the PRISM project, it sounds like we've got an awful lot of overlap in this idea of bringing fellows into campuses, finding opportunities to help them develop their own projects and using this. And so we were hoping that we might connect. We think there's a great chance to collaborate there. But it also gives us a chance to emphasize again that this work becomes the work of everyone in the academy, right? It's not just for the learning scientists hiding in the basement of Newell Simon Hall. Part of our work with ETX is an effort to build out exemplar courseware. This has been a project that's been funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation with the notion that they believe that if the best that courseware has to offer can be built out in a way that emphasizes thoughtful, equity-based principles, that we have a real opportunity to push the needle on the 20 STEM gateway courses in the US. And though we call them gateway courses, they're most often gatekeeper courses. We were awarded a grant to build out a chemistry courseware, which we've been working on now for the past 2 years. We talk about as the Real Chem Pilot, so relevant, engaging, and active learning with the aspiration that we want to build this out well beyond chemistry. This course is really exciting and I think also shows some of the capabilities of the Taurus platform. If you're interested in learning more, we've got a booth right out front, and I know there's a great video about the course that you can take a look at, and some of the folks at the booth can tell you a little more about it. That approach has also given us the opportunity and the funding to really dramatically update the Taurus user experience. The program officer at the Gates Foundation who once asked me, why is it that every educational technology initiative that comes out of universities looks like it was built in 1995? And I kind of looked at my shoes and said, well, under the hood, it's really good. It has demonstrable learning outcomes. And he lectured me a lot about the fact that what our students and faculty expect is technology that looks and feels like this. We cannot continue to give them experiences that feel as though they are more than 20 years old. And so part of our emphasis with Real Chem has been keeping what works under the hood, but also layering on top what we think is a pretty compelling modern user experience that so far is being really well received. Next on our list is to take what we're learning from this real STEM work and in partnership with the Gates Foundation, take a swing at what the future of post-secondary math courseware might look like. Similar to the first effort, there's this real emphasis on equity and very carefully identifying who are the learners that are most important for this project to serve, and then building courseware with a targeted universalist approach that can help to address their needs. You will hear John on Sunday, talk a little bit about some of our broader work in which took us to winning the X Prize, and that is work in helping to provide support for better experimentation, whether A/B testing or adaptive experimentation. This is work funded by our National Science Foundation, but we're looking for folks who are interested in helping to create, helping to test, helping to run their own experiments in this space. And finally, over the past year, we've been hard at work with our collaborators at NAMTech. You may have noticed that we were jointly putting together the booth out front, some direction. For those of you that aren't aware, NAMTech is a relatively new institute that is emphasizing change in a couple of directions. There's been a real look at post-grad work for advanced manufacturing and providing the kind of training that those students need. There's also been an interest in looking at much earlier student learning. Our partnership has emphasized ways that we can work together to leverage learning engineering, but also to help build capacity and see that learning engineering approach applied more broadly across India. There's a fantastic project as part of their School of Social Outreach in which we are seeing a series of modules emphasizing STEM and employability skills being used first in an MVP way by 5 ITIs locally, That project was successful. We did an iterative improvement cycle, and so it's now in pilot mode. So we're now seeing this in use by thousands of students. If that's successful, we're going to iterate again and continue to find ways to scale. This partnership is one of the most exciting pieces of international work that we've had in a long time. So super thrilled to be presenting with our colleagues from NAMTech. And if you want to learn more about these efforts, there are 3 different talks that I'd call your attention to. First, immediately after this session, we have a panel talking about technology for inclusive education. He's going to be a part of that panel. Tomorrow, Tanvi, wave your hand, Tanvi, who's a learning engineer, part of the OLI team, but has been directing efforts for our partnership with NAMTech. We'll be talking about this work of working with the ITIs and how we start to think about and account for cultural context. Finally, on Sunday, John Stamper is going to be talking about data-informed AI for education, in which he is going to take my skepticism and stomp on it and show you what enthusiasm looks like. All right. I went through that much faster than I intended. I will once more blame the jet lag. But let me ask if we have any questions, space for discussion.
Thank you, Norman, for that wonderful talk. I hope the glitch was not a problem. It was very well understood by the audience. Any questions? Okay, so all of you have eaten lunch? All of you? Okay, there's one question.
Thank you. It was wonderful listening to you. My name is Krishnakant Roy, and you said something about mathematics instruction. So currently I'm working on a project how AI can help learning mathematics. So can you tell me what is your project which is happening?
Yeah, so I think that one of the areas that we've been emphasizing in math education, and I think the use of AI generally, is where are there opportunities to inform large language models with better domain models, right? Because for an awful lot of our domains, and chemistry is kind of a flagship on this, the domain model's been well built. And so we've got some folks who have been experimenting with, can you use some of that domain knowledge as a governor on the kind of information that the AI agent is providing? But within that context in math, we're looking at places where we want to provide problem selection. We're interested in that question of how do faculty make data actionable. And so rather than asking them to walk into the class, interpret the dashboard, and then figure out an activity, we're finding some pretty interesting opportunities for letting the AI interpret the data and then say, hey, looks like your students are struggling with mean and mode, and here's some PowerPoints and some in-class parent shares that might be helpful. Beyond that, some of it is what you'd expect. We've fallen victim, I think, to the AI chatbot in the corner. And what's been interesting about that from a research perspective, we were lucky to have an undergraduate HCI capstone team investigate our, see if you can see it in the corner, dot, creatively named, investigating like what kind of information is this thing providing? Because it's pre-processing the entire courseware, it's got access to the schedule, it's got access to student learning model. And sort of interestingly, the students end up trusting this thing an awful lot to know chemistry. They believe what it says, and they told us explicitly that it was clear that dot had a much better chemical awareness, than ChatGPT. Under the hood, it's just ChatGPT, right? So students trust it more, but what we're seeing is that they don't know how to ask good questions, right? They don't know how to make use of the thing. And this isn't shocking. Like in our actual human-led classes, when you ask, how many of you have a question? Most of the time, my students don't raise their hand. And she said, how many of you don't know enough to ask a question? Well, then the hands go up. So we're trying to figure out ways to surface the agent at times when it would be good for the student to ask a question. Last piece on this, sort of philosophically, my colleagues in the School of Computer Science have been just kicking the large language models a lot. They're very annoyed and disgusted at the enthusiasm for LLMs right now because they say, look, this is just one AI model. We're interested in, like, there are many other kinds of technologies that are better suited. Why is this one the one that has caught on? My sense is that this has become exciting because we have removed a barrier to interacting with the AI, right? We have a user experience that allows anyone to jump in, begin corresponding, begin designing in a way that doesn't require a PhD in computer science. And so we've tried to carry that philosophy back into the courseware. We're running some experiments over the summer in which any of our authors, any of our course designers and our learning engineers can call up the AI and provide targeted prompts at any point in the course, again, without needing to come back and ask the programmers to do something or ask someone else to engage. So I think that with that, what we're expecting is a careful round of ongoing experimentation that's going to start to tell us what we should be doing rather than just jumping in and trying to figure it out.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, there's a question.
Thank you. It was a wonderful talk.
Thank you.
I have two questions interlinked. One, you showed that wonderful learning curve, right? Is that generic with all your initiatives? We see a clear, trajectory going down. Is that generic with all? And the second one is, I know that you showed some pedagogical strategies that you use, some philosophies, but are there 2 or 3 key aspects that you see responsible for such wonderful learning curves?
Yeah, so great question, because I really breezed through learning curves. There's a lot more complexity under the hood, and I suspect John will talk a little bit about that on Sunday. But the notion within our OLI course is we're trying to build a relatively straightforward but still thoughtful learning model that's 2-tiered. So we've got learning objectives, we've got skills sitting underneath. For every activity that's in the course, particularly every formative and summative assessment, we tie those back to what we think are the most likely KCs, right? So we built it to address these skills. So we've got this information for all of the activities in the course, and in turn, this lets us generate for all of the skills in the course. And what we find is that this is really an ongoing process of iteration, that our first attempt to build these really falls back on intuition. What do I think I'm teaching as an instructor? And so over the course of a few semesters, we use the learning curves to identify what are the skills that seem to be doing just fine, what are the skills where we're not seeing learning happening, and what are the skills where we're not seeing the model that we thought, the design that we thought showing up. And so the idea is really that over 4 or 5 cycles, we'll start to see more and more of these curves start to fit into that pattern. But I don't want to suggest that there's one perfect learning curve template, right? That in the end, this is a tool for helping us understand how is our learning model working, and where isn't it working? Where do we need more help? In terms of strategies, the 2 are well-written questions with answer choices that target likely student misconceptions, right? And we get a little bit of flack because our authors often fall back a lot on multiple choice. It's easy to grade, right? Which is nice. But the key here is that I think often when you hear larger item writing theory talked about, we talk about those items as a distractor. And in fact, I'm not interested in distracting my students. What is that? That's terrible. I'm not playing tricks on them. What I'm trying to do is identify what are their likely answers, what do those answers indicate about their current knowledge state, and what kind of feedback can I give to help them adjust that knowledge state? And I find that that's a very different frame from how can I build some questions with distractors, right? It's hard work, it's careful, detail-oriented work that a lot of faculty don't want to invest the time in. I'll tell you, I personally find it incredibly tedious, but I'm glad that people enjoy doing it. So taking a step back, the strategy here is we want to embed as many opportunities for doing, for solving a problem, for answering a question, and for getting targeted feedback as we can throughout the courseware. I think that that's probably the single biggest, most successful strategy that we've seen. We continue to emphasize building out specialized learning activities where needed, and I think that that also becomes a strategy that is just absolutely necessary for driving the research piece. And I think the last is that we look for and continue to try to find ways that these activities can be used to engage in the classroom and to engage with other students. And this ends up being a place that we're not doing quite as well. So how do we start to look at a world of computer-supported collaborative learning? How do we encourage students to go and engage with one another? Because over and over we hear from students that that's what they want and that's what they're missing, connections and community with their peers, with their faculty member. I think the last thing that's super interesting, and again, I keep like, go hear John's talk on Sunday. It's really good. We've had some recent research into the idea that we have some folks who learn faster and some folks who learn slower. And so we've got research in trying to understand what makes for a slow learner, what makes for a fast learner. John's going to talk about it. Turns out that the answers are pretty shocking, and they give us a hint on where we focus our attentions in iterative improvement, which is finding ways to close opportunity gaps. So that's a teaser for John's talk. Really good work. Thanks.
Okay, as session chair, I have the opportunity to ask the question. This is related because yesterday, this is compute, which happened, the inauguration happened yesterday. There was a talk of teaching practice partnerships. And today in Prism, you saw teachers doing a lot of things in their classrooms and making them document the research. I had read about the Simon initiative and the effort that you did for the data science education. I think you had a set of teachers come, and I think your postdoc students and PhD students worked with them to design a curriculum or something like that. So what were the important data metrics that you looked at from this kind of partnerships? Or do you look at any specific set of features that come out of it? Just so that, these kind of initiatives can also now look at more specific data collection that they would want to do, because many a times in country like India, doing data collection using these kind of centralized online things may not be feasible. So what all were the kind of data that you collected as part of this initiative? If you could just throw light on that, that would be great.
Sure. So when we talk about the DS4EDU project, the notion here is that we have practitioners out in the field, and they may be professors, they may be administrators, they may be people serving in government, who want to learn more about emerging data science approaches for education, and who have some kind of job that would benefit from data analysis, right? So they're showing up with a project, and it turns out that they show up with really diverse projects, sometimes ones we're not great at supporting. And part of our job is to help understand from their project, what are their existing data? What are the data they're already capturing? Where is that data going to be robust enough to run some of these analyses? And how does it start to change? And this sort of leads to, so at Carnegie Mellon, the kind of teaching and research partnerships you're describing sort of fall under our Center for Teaching and Learning, unsurprisingly. And they talk about this entire initiative as TAR, Teaching as Research. And I think the learning from that work is that when you have educators who come in eager to do research and they have a hypothesis on how to change or approach an innovation, you cannot expect them to do all of the work. You have to surround them with learning engineers who can help them to design and build the instrumented experience, and with psychometricians who can help them make sure that the question they're asking is answerable from their data. And folks like John and his team who are then able to help perform the analyses of their data, give them some answers so that they can then start to iteratively improve. What we find is that if you provide robust supports in the beginning, many of our educators will then start to pick up these skills and end up continuing to work and iterate as they go. Though not everyone, right? There are others who are saying, you know what, this is great. I just need to design the learning experience, and I've got this robust support team. And that's a challenge. We are very fortunate at CMU to have an exceptional Center for Teaching and Learning that can provide those supports. I think one of the questions that we've been asking with our NAMTech partners is, how do we build capacity for this kind of learning engineering effort without assuming that we can just start up a fresh SOTL center at each institution? But it's really early days. We're still trying to figure it out, and we'd love help.
There seems to be 2 questions.
Thanks for the details of your initiative. So at one point you mentioned, you used the phrase learning design as a hypothesis. And we all know that design is effective when we know some specific group of people that we are designing for. So my question is, in your context, for example, how does your design adapt, for example, if it's for community college learners and instructors versus CMU, let alone, the diversity in India?
Yeah, so it's a great question because we try to balance out a couple of different perspectives, right? And one of these, CMU has an incredible cognitive emphasis on learning. It really informs the work we do, going back to Herb Simon. And from that perspective, there are some aspects of learning that do not change, right? That are just biologically encoded and that we need to try to address and support. But at the same time, we absolutely know and keep finding over and over again that social and cultural contexts end up moderating that experience and that we have to design and change for them. One of the ways that we address this is to try to build the best learning experience that we can, engage with some of the faculty that teach these students and do some early testing and involving them in the design. And in some ways, nothing beats bringing the experts in. Experts in this case were spending day-to-day time in the classroom to get their perspectives and let them help shape that, that design. But I think the second piece, so we have a different NSF grant called the CCSS. It's on the website. The basic sort of underlying notion of this is that for years and years, the OLI philosophy was that we could build the one perfect course, right? We were just going to build the perfect statistics course. And once it was perfect, everybody would use it, right? Why wouldn't they? And of course, that's nonsense. And it's nonsense in part because there is no one perfect course for everyone. And so this CCSS effort is explicitly engaging with community college faculty doing 2-year STEM programs and saying, look, you know something about your learner population, you know something about your instructional context. Take this chemistry course that exists. Let us help you understand what do the data say, how do you build a data-informed set of changes, then go in and start making changes to the course and let's find out, were your hypotheses on how these students can learn correct, or are there places where we need to be adjusted? So I think that we have, and I guess I started with this, I'll end with it as well, we have no better option than to bring these folks into the community and really build it as a larger community-based research activity. That said, as we continue to look at opportunities that AI give us for helping to interpret data, helping to create different kinds of learning activities on the fly, we suspect that there are going to be different kinds of knowledge and prompts that will help them build activities better suited for different populations. Thanks, great question. I took that slide off.
I think we have time only for this question. I think Norman is available throughout the conference, throughout the day after now, and I think he's staying back for the next 2 days as well. So if you have questions, I would encourage all of you to directly interact with Norman and get more one-to-one insights. So thank you for that wonderful session, Norman, and as is the custom, please do accept token of appreciation.
Oh, thank you so much.
It's a kind of puzzle based on the Indian tradition.
Oh, cool.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank all of you. Look forward to talking with you over the next few days.
Okay, operational announcement. So there are 2 panel sessions happening over here. So this panel on technology for inclusive education is happening at AB